Hey, Jason Rogers here, and in this video, I want to talk to you about some of the differences between on-market versus off-market deals. We're specifically talking about deals. These are going to be businesses and pieces of property for sale in that $1 million to $5 million range. That's really where heretofore I have personal experience in. Yes, I have advisors that I work with that have a lot of experience working on bigger deals, but I like to speak about things that I have personal firsthand experience in. And for me, it's that $1 to $5 million deal range spot that I have really been actively a part of in the last 2 or so years. And I want to talk to you about on-market versus off-market deals. There are pros and cons to both, and let's dive into it. So first things first, what is an on-market versus an off-market deal? We need working definitions before we can proceed, right? So an on-market deal is a deal that is being actively listed and represented by a business broker or a real estate agent if you're in the real estate side of the thing, or maybe even an investment banker if it's towards that $5 million deal size. An investment banker and a business broker are by and large synonymous, the only real difference being that investment bankers work on larger deals, usually $5 million or more, whereas business brokers tend to work on $1, $2, $3, $4 million deals, or sometimes even smaller than $1 million. But in any event, an on-market deal has representation. The seller has basically agreed to work with a broker or a real estate agent or an investment banker. Again, more or less these terms are synonymous, but the seller has representation. Now, why is that a benefit? We'll get to that in a minute. Why is that a negative? We'll get to that in a minute. But first, let's talk about an off-market deal. And you can probably already guess what an off-market deal is, but for clarity, let's talk about it very quickly. An off-market deal is essentially a business or a piece of property, obviously with an owner, whether that owner is actually an individual or an LLC or a corporation, right? Ultimately, though, even that corporation or that LLC is owned by either an individual or a partnership or, a party, a host of individuals. But in any event, an off-market deal is a business or a piece of property that has not listed, pretty simply. They haven't listed with a real estate agent. They haven't listed with a business broker. They haven't listed with an investment banker. They're simply operating their business. And then you show up, ring, ring, ring. Hi there, may I speak with the owner? You get connected with the owner and you ask that owner if you want to sell. That's basically what an off-market deal is, and that's essentially how you're going to find off-market deals. There are other ways. We'll talk about that some, and I've actually made a number of videos talking about how to get deal flow. So this video is going to be less about strategy of deal flow and how to procure it, and more about the pros and cons of on-market versus off-market deals. First things first, the pros of an on-market deal are simply put that the seller is looking to sell. I mean, they've literally acquired representation because they're looking to sell their business or their piece of property, right? So that the business owner is entertaining offers. And that is nice. It's basically like going to a bar with a bunch of women, if you're in a dating context, that showed up because they're single and they're looking to date. That's basically what an on-market deal is. It's like having a bunch of suitors that are there because they're looking for a partner. Whereas, of course, the problem with an off-market deal is that seller motivated? Are they even really considering selling? I can tell you from firsthand experience that if you make 100 calls to 100 businesses, you may only get 10 that are thinking about selling, or at least that will say they're thinking about selling. And sometimes it's actually a lot lower than that. Sometimes you have to place 50 calls just to get one owner that's thinking about selling. Now, the problem with off-market deal flow as well is a lot of times you're dealing with secretaries that are diverting you from talking to the business owner. It's often difficult to get a hold of the business owner. These things are indeed challenging. However, there are massive benefits to off-market deal flow. And the biggest of all is that there isn't a broker involved, so you can immediately engage with the seller directly. And likewise, that business broker, if you're talking about business sales, a business broker is going to usually take, or the brokerage from which the broker represents, right? Because a business broker may be a part of a larger brokerage house. That's usually how it works. But that brokerage house, for each business that they're listing to the marketplace, to potential buyers, they're usually going to take an 8 or a 10 or a 12 or even up to a 14 or 15% commission on the transaction, which means even for just a $1 million deal, that brokerage house is going to get paid $80,000, $100,000, $120,000, $140,000, or even $150,000. 8 to 15% is pretty standard for on-market deals in the business world. And even for pieces of property, usually the brokerage firm is going to take about a 4%, sometimes a 3%, sometimes a 5 or a 6% commission on selling that piece of property. So in either event, the problem with an on-market deal, even though yes, it's easier to get access to, usually when you work with an on-market deal and you're working with the broker or the real estate agent or the investment banker, they have all the financials already prepared. They've procured the tax returns and the balance sheets and the P&Ls, right? So that's nice. Usually they've created a CIM, a confidential information memorandum, which is basically a summary, a 5 or 10 or 20 or 30 page or even 50 page, depending on the deal size and the sophistication of the brokerage house. Usually, however, they've created a PDF type of a document that outlays the deal and the business for sale or the piece of property for sale and its financials and its competitive advantages and its summary and, you know, the overview of the organizational chart and all these different key facts that you're in. I use facts with italicized writing because often one of the negatives with business brokers or real estate brokers or investment bankers is they fluff the deal. You have to verify the information. It's the old Reagan quote, trust but verify, although I would even go farther and say be skeptical and verify when it comes to brokers, because unfortunately my experience has really suggested that a lot of times they will overinflate the financials and the profit of the business that they are representing. But those are nice things, right? When you reach out to an on-market deal and you're able to sign an NDA and then immediately get the financials for the business and immediately get a CIM and immediately get the tax returns, it allows you to analyze the deal very quickly. Whereas on an off-market deal, you need to essentially educate the seller in many cases, or the prospective seller that are thinking about selling, and you need to educate that business owner about, hey, I'm going to send you this non-disclosure agreement. Upon executing it, I'm going to request your financials for your business. I'm going to be asking you some questions, right? So with the off-market deal, you're essentially working directly with the business owner, and you oftentimes have to educate the business owner about how this process works. However, the nice thing is you're dealing right with the source. There's no middleman. Of course, a broker or an investment banker or a real estate agent, they are the middleman. And when you cut out the middleman, literally you're able to get the deal, all other things created equal, at a better price. And often you get a much more honest answer from the seller than you do a broker. And this is sometimes one of the reasons why sellers will work with a broker, because they know that if they immediately start getting asked difficult questions, they're going to quote unquote spill the beans. Whereas an investment banker or a broker or a real estate agent, they're very good at acting on behalf of their client. And sometimes it means they're able to sell the property a little bit more effectively. They're able to hype up the deal, right? So there's pros and cons to each side. What do? We do a combination of the two. You know, our first deal actually was off market, but just underneath the surface. There's kind of a hybrid. And this is actually our first deal. We did the Nebraska deal that I documented here on YouTube. It was not officially an on-market deal. So for example, you could not have gone on LoopNet or Crexi or BizBuyForSell or any of these websites that basically post and promote these businesses or pieces of property for sale. You could not have gone on any of those websites and found the deal that we did. However, the owner of that business, because the broker actually cold called him and warmed him up to the idea, the owner of that business was working with a broker. But the seller of that business told the broker, don't promote this thing. It was equivalent of a pocket listing, which is essentially a listing that a broker or a real estate agent or an investment banker has, where they know they're trying to sell the piece of property or the business, but they're not actively promoting it. Often because the seller of the business says, you're not allowed to. I am not comfortable with you posting this all over the place. And that's where we came in and we placed a cold call to the owner. And the owner said, hey, you know what? I'm thinking about it. I actually recently just signed with a broker. Here's his name. Here's his number. You can reach out to him. And we did. And the rest is more or less history. I documented that process on the YouTube channel here at youtube.com/Jason Paul Rogers. By the way, if you haven't yet, hit the subscribe button. Okay, so that's what I would call just beneath the surface of an on-market deal. It wasn't a totally off-market deal because the seller had representation, but it wasn't a totally on-market deal where there was a lot more attention because it wasn't being promoted on any of these websites. It wasn't being promoted anywhere. I think that's in some ways the best of both worlds, but of course the only negative there is that because the seller has representation, that brokerage house in our case took, I believe, a 4% commission. Now, it was a lower commission than 8 or 10 or 12 or 14% because we really bought a cash flowing piece of property, a multifamily property in the manufactured housing niche. Real estate commissions tend to be lower than traditional M&A commissions, right? Real estate, again, 3 to 5, maybe 6%. M&A commissions for a brokerage house, 8 to 15%. And so for me, I believe it's even more prudent that you go off market for M&A transactions than it is for real estate transactions, because the brokerage percentage in question is much higher for the M&A transaction. Look, 4% for ease of finding and analyzing a lot of deals. When you consider that most real estate appreciates at 2 to 3 to 4% a year, depending on the local market and the economics and all these other factors, I don't mind working with a broker that's going to help facilitate the transaction, make things happen more quickly. I don't mind that too much. And look, I'm not totally opposed to brokers or investment bankers or real estate agents, but I'm also not totally opposed to going off market and placing those calls myself. I'm a big believer that you have two different types of bait that you're fishing for, right? You have the power bait here and you have the worms here. Both can catch fish. Both can be effective. Both are imperfect, right? You cast out with a worm, eventually the worm dies. It stops wiggling around and it eventually becomes less attractive to the fish, right? The power bait, one, it smells funny, even more funny than the worms, and equally, eventually, it gets too soggy and it comes off your hook, right? So no approach is perfect, right? On-market deals have their pros, right? They're easily accessible. You're gonna be able to get the financials and the key information about the business more quickly, right? With off-market deals, you're not dealing with a middleman, so you get to go right to the source. You get to immediately interact with the individual or the individuals who own the property or the business. But with the off-market deal, you're dealing with a seller that may or not be actually motivated to sell. They've actually taken no concrete actions until they actually start engaging with you to really prove they're serious about selling. It may take them a lot longer to get you the key documentation that you need. And ultimately, at any point, they may just lose interest over here. Whereas, of course, that can happen as well with on-market deals. But generally speaking, once a seller really lists with an agent or a broker or an investment banker, they're usually pretty darn committed to sell. But of course, the problem over here with that on-market deal flow is, man, that commission, that 4 to 15% commission depending, usually that's going to result in an increased price. Usually, all things created equal, you're going to find a better value for your money with the off-market deal than the on-market deal. But the on-market deal is easily accessible. The off-market deal is more difficult to access, right? So access is a key variable here. You really pay more on the on-market deal world for easier access. It's easier to find deals on market. And of course, that's one of the problems with on-market deals. There's a lot more eyeballs here. There's a lot more competition here. It's a lot easier for me to go on my computer and type in laundromats for sale, landscaping businesses for sale, pizza parlors for sale, what have you. Whereas for the on-market world, I have to work a lot harder. But man, once I find an owner that has been thinking about selling but hasn't listed with anybody, if I can build good rapport with that seller, he and I or she and I can work out a heck of a deal that puts more money in his or her back pocket without giving all this commission to a broker or an investment banker. They can hire a lawyer and just pay that lawyer out to get the job done to basically analyze the purchase and sale agreement and those kinds of things. So in some ways, the best of all is finding a motivated off-market seller with a great business. That's the best, but it's the hardest. It takes a lot of smiling and dialing. Or you can do emails, or you can do direct mail where you send letters or marketing materials to a bunch of businesses in a local geographic area, right? There are different ways to find off-market deal flow. I actually made an entire video here on my YouTube channel. I believe it's titled 7 Ways to Find Motivated Sellers. I would refer to that video. It's in depth. It's actually done in black and white. So if you find the black and white video of mine, you'll know that's the one. That video goes in depth about how to find deals. And we talk about on-market strategies and off-market strategies. But ultimately, those are the pros and cons, which is really what I wanted to do for you. And again, what's my recommendation? Buy a second fishing pole and fish out on this side of the boat and fish out on this side of the boat as well. Always be fishing. The more deal flow you have, the more leverage you have in business. There's no arguing that. That is a fact. The more deals you're looking at, the more deals you're analyzing, the more sellers you're talking to, the more brokers or investment bankers you're interfacing with, the more leverage you have as a buyer. If you only have one deal that you really have in your pipeline, that seller kind of has you over by a barrel if you're a motivated buyer, if you want to get into the marketplace and make an acquisition or make multiple acquisitions. Whereas, man, when you're looking at a bunch of deals, if one seller decides they don't want to sell, no problem. I have 15 more in my pipeline. Another seller wants too much money, no problem. I have 13 other deals I'm looking at. Right? A third business turns out to not be so good operationally, or they have problems. Maybe they have a troubled legal history. No problem. I still have 12 more deals. Right? So that's the leverage that happens when you start casting out a lot of lines. Look, you're fishing out on this side of the boat and you're not getting anything. No problem. I'm getting bites over here on this side of the boat. That's really the premise I really recommend for you and recommend for all acquisitions entrepreneurs if you're serious about buying businesses or great pieces of property. I'll leave you on that note. Other than so as to say, if you've liked this video, throw it some love, thumbs up the video. It helps me keep helping you. Be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel for more finance, M&A, and real estate related content like this. Share your comments below. I want to hear from you. What have you liked? What have you disliked? What would you like me to talk about next? Sharing your comments below engages the algorithm. It helps me, again, keep helping you. And with that all said, I will see you in the next video.